Hello, Endeavor here. And where is here? Well, this is St. Petersburg, Russia. I've been living here for a few years now, and everyone's been asking me over the last couple of weeks, both about what's going on, about the conflict in Ukraine, and about myself personally. And I just wanted to say to everyone I'm safe and in good spirits, but I'm actually not going to talk about the conflict. All I can say is that I just hope it ends as soon as possible, and I just want the best for everyone involved. I'm actually going to talk about something else. When it started, it was a huge spectacle for both the mainstream media and for a lot of our guys on social media. And I can understand why. It's the first conflict like this in the era of social media. It's really something that no one has ever seen before. And I mean, the first couple of days were really quite wild. You know, on Twitter there'd be all these videos of warfare, and then all these accounts changing their profile pictures and all these hot takes and stuff. It was just this one huge spectacle. But for me, it really wasn't that entertaining, because my first thoughts were, well, how is this going to affect my life? So far, it hasn't actually been too much, but that could change at any time. Behind the spectacle of explosions and Twitter hot takes are real-life consequences for real people's lives. Social media creates what is referred to as hyper-reality. It's a reality created through technology and images in which people can't really distinguish between actual reality and imitations of reality. The hyper-reality which social media creates is addictive, but it's extremely unhealthy. Distributus made a great video of the reaction of Western social media to the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine, which really resonated with me as someone adjacent to this all, though, obviously not really in the thick of it. I don't have much to say because outside of the hyper-reality of social media, I don't really have any control over the reality of the conflict going on in Ukraine right now. It is real, but it's not something that I have any influence over. I'm not someone with geopolitical power or influence at all. And it got me thinking, how do we cope with Clown World? We're not the ones making the decisions, but they have a profound impact on all of us. Well, despite this conflict, my personal life right now is actually really good. Spring is on the way. In St. Petersburg, you hardly ever see the sun from October to February. When it returns in March, my mood always brightens. Like a clear, sunny day like this is something that you just don't see for half the year. And when it comes back, that first morning you wake up and you see the sun in the sky, it just brightens your mood. And despite all the crazy stuff that's going on right now, I don't actually feel that depressed or that afraid of it all. A few weeks ago, Twitter and Facebook were actually shut down in Russia, and I couldn't help but just feel relieved. I now spend far less time in my day in that hyper reality and far more in actual reality. I had the feeling the world was being taken for another ride like we were in March 2020. Now, I'm not saying that the conflict in Ukraine is not real. It's a real conflict, but you saw the same system kick into gear again and just whip up the NPCs, the blue check marks, into the same frenzy that they were. Pick your conflict. The BLM, the pandemic, the elections, and I saw the same thing happening over and over again. And the MSM was hysterical. The blue check marks were making Marvel and Harry Potter comparisons on Twitter. The NPCs were changing their profile pictures, and many on the right were actually giving their hot takes, which it is kind of really just our own side of that hyper reality. It's you can have your opinion on this, but ultimately it's not a conflict that really any one on the dissident right in the West really has any say over. And I can't tell you how relieved I was when my access to Twitter and Facebook was just shut off. You can still access it with a VPN. I have a VPN. I could go on it, but I find I just don't want to now. I have the habit of checking my phone and checking Twitter, checking Facebook, but now every time I do that, it comes up with the screen comes up that it's unavailable, and then I just breathe a sigh of relief, just to not have to deal with that anymore. I'm still following what's going on in Telegram, and I check in on the MSM from now and then, but I'm off Twitter and Facebook, and I think those two platforms are the worst because they're performative. You post things on there because you want validation, you want someone to reply, you want someone to give you the like, and they're the ones that are just the absolute worst because they bring out the absolute worst in people. I mean, Telegram, has its problems, but Twitter and Facebook are really just the worst. And that doesn't mean that what's going on doesn't matter. I mean, it still affects your life, but you have to make IRL decisions that affect the real world, and posts on Twitter don't do that. It's a hyper reality which gives you the impression that you're affecting the real world when in reality you aren't. Everyone has decisions to make about how you're going to survive Clown World and to maintain a pure mind while doing so and not go insane. Like during the pandemic, for example, I mean, the entire thing was hyper-reality. The profile pics, the fear-mongering, the artificial moralism, the phony religion that was created around it. It was all orchestrated by powers far beyond any of our control, but everyone had a choice to make. We had no choice but to live through it. Do you take the medication or do you not? Do you wear the mask or do you not? The health risks aside of taking the certain medication, which I can't mention here, that aside, the problem with doing so is that it validates the lie. Morgoth made a great video on this. I actually had the opportunity to get a QR code without taking the certain medication, which would have basically given me access to everything that it was designed to block off. And many people ask me, well, why don't you just do that? I had the opportunity to. I mean, it turned out that I didn't really need to. There were plenty of ways around it. Not that I need to get into that here, but beyond that, beyond the health issue, the idea of showing a QR code to go to a restaurant or a gym is degrading to the human soul. It brands you like a cattle, and I just couldn't bring myself to do that. I just couldn't degrade myself in that way. Now that it has been temporarily abolished, I'm proud that I didn't give into it and I stayed on the right side. So it's validating the fake reality that's been created for us, and it's your way of living within that lie. And, it's just something that I couldn't do. And I think that that's how you need to survive Clown World, to not give in to the spectacle and to try to stay pure and uncorrupted. I know that movie analogies over the last few weeks have been really cringe and quite distasteful. People talking about like Star Wars or Marvel movies or whatever. But I am going to engage a little bit. However, this film is actually based on Russian literature, and I don't just want to talk about what's going on now between Russia and Ukraine. It's more about Clown World in general. Basically, the last couple years, everything that's gone on. One of my favorite movies of all time is David Lean's Dr. Zhivago. In the film, Zhivago lives through the First World War, the Russian Revolution, the Russian Civil War, arguably the worst time in Russian history. He goes from being a prestigious doctor and a beloved poet with a new family in Imperial Russia to being this sickly, destitute man on the streets of Moscow in the early Soviet era, having lost not only one but two women in his life. But throughout the grand historical events which Dr. Zhivago lives through, he maintains a healthy soul. Throughout the film, Dr. Zhivago is swept up in these massive historical events which are way beyond his control. but he's able to still find beauty in the world and express it through his poetry and maintain the human spirit. And I'm not comparing myself to Dr. Zhivago here. Life right now is really actually quite ordinary and quite mundane. So, and I think this can really apply to anyone, but I think this is kind of the approach you need to take to clown world. Today, I'm not someone who has any real geopolitical power or influence, and that goes for probably everyone watching this video. I hope that someday in the future that changes for people of our persuasion, but in a world in which there's grand plans going on being orchestrated by people whose power far exceeds anything we can even imagine, I think that what you need to do with your own life is to try to maintain a healthy soul. Aside from the very real problems that exist in the world today, which you need to make decisions on, this postmodern world also seems intent on crushing the human spirit. And something like Twitter is the perfect example of this. It gives you the feeling that you're actually contributing to something when you're not, that you're living in a certain reality which doesn't exist. It makes you seek the validation for things that really just don't matter. And, it's just one of these tools that is being used to drag us along this roller coaster from one crisis to another. It's always turned up to 11, and it's something that you just feel more angry when you're using. You feel depressed, you feel anxious, but then you just can't stop with it. And it's just something that's absolutely detrimental to anyone who wants to survive this world and maintain a sense of sanity. So, you really got to think, with all the things that are going on, how does it affect you? What are the things that you can do? Is changing your profile picture, is writing a hashtag, is, lashing out at the friend or family member who doesn't jump on the current trend, is that really helping you out? I mean, I'm mentioning things that the left does, but the right can actually be guilty of that too. The hot takes, the infighting, the LARPing, the lack of seriousness, the irony. That's not how we're going to survive clown world. It's going to be through making the decisions that give you a sense of stability and normalcy in your life. As people who have no control whatsoever about what's happening in Ukraine or DC or Davos, but who are affected by this stuff nonetheless, what I think we should strive for is to maintain a healthy soul throughout. Thank you for listening.